Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you've ever looked at headlines about ocean health, you know that fish conservation is always front and center, yet often fraught with controversy. Today, we are wrestling with a really landmark scientific paper. It fundamentally shifted how the world assesses extinction risk in the marine environment. Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a critical review titled Biology of Extinction Risk in Marine Fishes. It was published back in 2005. The lead author was John D. Reynolds, and his work, well, it really forced the conservation community to rethink decades of assumptions about how resilient marine life truly is.
Yeah, that's right. And our mission here is pretty straightforward.
Right.
We want to synthesize the complex research the authors pulled together. They specifically looked at the interplay between two critical sets of factors. The things that determine a fish's vulnerability.
Yeah, we can define those simply, right? What are we talking about?
Exactly. So first, you have the external human threats, what the paper calls extrinsic factors.
Like fishing pressure?
Yep. Think industrial fishing pressure or maybe habitat loss. And then you have the fish's inherent makeup, its intrinsic factors. That's essentially its biology, how big it gets, how fast it grows, how many babies it produces, that kind of thing.
And understanding the interplay is vital because, the stakes are enormous. Fishes are technically the most species-rich vertebrate group on the entire planet.
That's right, just an astounding amount of biodiversity.
Yet fish conservation lags far, far behind that, the charismatic species like mammals, birds, even amphibians. When this paper came out, less than 5% of the world's estimated 15,500 marine fish species had actually had their status formally assessed. That's just a huge knowledge vacuum where critical decisions are being made.
And the data we do have, which is mostly concerning commercially harvested stocks, well, it's deeply worrying. The paper detailed these really severe population declines already observed globally. They looked at data from 98 North Atlantic and Northeast Pacific fish populations, and they required a minimum of 25 years of monitoring data for each one.
Okay, so long-term data, what was the conclusion?
The conclusion. By 2001, the breeding biomass of these marine fishes had declined by a staggering median of 65%.
Wow. 65% median decline. That's shocking.
It gets worse. Nearly a third of those populations, 29%, specifically had declined by over 80%.
80%. Now, if a bird population or, a rhino population dropped 80%, international conservation bodies would immediately slap a threatened status on it.
Right, no question.
But with fish, that interpretation is, as you said, highly controversial. Why? Why the resistance?
Well, the controversy stems from this widespread, deeply ingrained perception. You find it even among some fisheries managers and biologists. The idea is that marine fishes possess this almost infinite resilience. The traditional wisdom points to things like high fecundity, the ability to produce millions of eggs and their huge geographical ranges.
Right. The argument is basically, sure, we fish them down hard, but they'll bounce back eventually because they're just reproductive machines.
Well, that's precisely the thinking.
So we have this massive external pressure colliding with this perceived biological invulnerability. Let's start with the external pressure. What were the key threats Reynolds and his team identified?
The drivers are primarily twofold. The single biggest driver of decline is overexploitation.
So fishing.
Almost entirely driven by industrial fishing, yes. And the second major factor is habitat degradation and loss.
And this goes beyond just pollution, right? We're talking bigger picture.
Absolutely. We're talking about the collapse of critical nursery habitats like coral reefs. This is due to accelerating coastal development, sedimentation, runoff. And of course, the profound impact of global warming and ocean acidification is a huge part of habitat degradation now.
Okay. So those two extrinsic factors, overfishing and habitat destruction, they're implicated in basically all the documented extinctions.
Pretty much. Virtually every documented local, regional, and even global marine fish extinction has those two factors at its heart.
The pressure is massive. But as the paper argues, it only works because of how the fish is built, its biology. So let's pivot to the biology, the intrinsic factors. This is where the paper delivers its biggest punch, I think. They didn't rely on anecdotes. They reviewed 15 different comparative analyses specifically designed to test for biological traits, life history traits that correlate with vulnerability. So what did the hard data actually say predicts vulnerability?
The answer is remarkably consistent, and it really challenges that common assumption about resilience. The empirical evidence consistently shows that large body size and late maturity are overwhelmingly the best predictors of vulnerability to fishing pressure.
Large size and late maturity.
Yes, and this relationship was robust. It held true even when the researchers meticulously controlled for differences in how heavily different species were being fished.
So it's not simply that big fish get targeted first, although maybe they do, but it's that being big and slow to mature is actually a fatal combination when you are targeted.
Precisely. These specific traits, large size, late maturity, also slow growth, longevity, they all result in something called a low maximum intrinsic rate of population increase, which is technical language for something simple but crucial. Their replacement rate is painfully slow.
Okay, wait, let's unpack that low intrinsic rate a bit more. Can you give us an analogy, maybe?
Sure. Think of it like this. If you run a small business, maybe a specialized one, and it takes, say, 15 years for a new employee to get fully trained and reach peak productivity.
Okay.
Now imagine you lose one of those highly productive, experienced employees. Replacing them takes 15 years. That makes your business extremely fragile. If you suddenly lose 5 key employees in some kind of crash or downturn, you might never actually recover fully.
Right, the lag time is just too long.
Exactly. The same is true here. If a fish species takes 10 or more years just to reach reproductive age, and then fishing pressure removes lots of those mature adults, the lag time for recovery for the next generation to grow up and replace them is enormous.
And this brings us directly back to that huge myth we talked about at the start, fecundity, the idea of millions of eggs.
Yeah.
If size and maturity are the dominant factors, what did the authors conclude about that common sense intuition that high egg counts save the day?
Yeah, this is really a paradigm shift. Reynolds and colleagues found no evidence, zero, no evidence whatsoever that high fecundity confers increased resilience. That sort of romantic idea of the one lucky female cod producing millions of eggs and single-handedly repopulating the entire North Atlantic.
Yeah.
It's completely unsupported by the data. It's a myth.
That is genuinely shocking because that idea underpins so much fisheries policy, so much management thinking. Why? Why is that high output of eggs apparently irrelevant compared to slow growth and late maturity?
Well, it's because high fecundity often correlates with a slow life history. It's part of the same package. Highly fecund fishes, the ones producing millions of eggs, they tend to be the large-bodied ones, the ones that are late to mature. Think about it. If a fish produces 5 million eggs, maybe 5 of those tiny eggs survive all the perils of early life to eventually become adults themselves. It's incredibly low survival. Now, if the adult fish is caught before it gets a chance to reproduce for several years or even decades for some long-lived species, then the millions of eggs it could have laid over its lifetime become totally irrelevant. What truly matters for population growth rate is adult survival and the age it takes to actually join the breeding pool.
So the takeaway is that many of these superfecund species are actually among the most vulnerable we have, precisely because they are also large and slow growing.
That's what the data shows, yes. They're often the most vulnerable.
It's also amazing that the paper found parallels to terrestrial conservation too. It wasn't just a marine phenomenon.
No, exactly. The researchers noted that the same life history correlates of vulnerability, large size, and late maturity applied directly to terrestrial species where hunting is the primary threat. So whether you're a large marine shark or, say, a big land mammal like an elephant, if you reproduce slowly, you are inherently vulnerable to human harvesting. The biology dictates the risk, regardless of land or sea.
Right. That clarity in the findings has immense practical implications then for these global regulatory bodies like the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature or CITES, the Trade Convention, and the American Fisheries Society. Their spread criteria are constantly under debate.
Yes, absolutely. And the research helped resolve, or at least shed significant light on, 3 critical debates, starting with the one we just covered.
Okay, number 1, challenging organizations that continue to incorporate high egg production into assessment criteria. The fecundity myth is busted.
Right, myth busted. The second major argument they systematically addressed was the claim about natural fluctuations. Critics often argue, oh, fish populations naturally fluctuate wildly, so these steep declines might just be natural cycles, not necessarily caused by fishing.
We hear that a lot.
We do! However, the comparative studies reviewed in the paper showed something pretty definitive. Marine fish generally do not exhibit greater temporal fluctuations in their adult population sizes than birds and terrestrial mammals do.
So when a fisheries manager says, oh, that 65% decline, that's just natural variation, the research says, hold on, no, that's not really supported by the broader comparative data. If a deer population drops 65%, we'd panic. The paper says fish aren't biologically magic. We should treat this decline as a genuine threat.
That's the key takeaway, yes. Treat the biology consistently. And the third controversy concerns the relationship between fisheries management goals and conservation goals.
Right. Is there necessarily a conflict between protecting fishing jobs and economies and protecting the species from, extinction risk?
Well, a very interesting empirical analysis highlighted in the paper suggested that actually there is no conflict between the aims of conservationists and fisheries managers for population declines greater than about 50%.
No conflict above 50% decline. How so?
Because if you keep the stock within what fisheries managers themselves define as safe biological limits, which usually means maintaining the biomass above a certain threshold to ensure future catches, you are, by definition, also keeping them safe from immediate extinction risk, the goals align when the decline becomes that substantial. Below 50%, maybe there's debate, but above that, everyone should agree there's a problem.
That alignment is a potentially powerful tool for policy, isn't it? Finding common ground. And this biological understanding also offers incredibly practical applications for threat assessment itself, allowing organizations maybe to set priorities even when detailed population data is scarce.
Exactly. Think about prioritization. Simple, easily observable traits like body size can be used for rapid screening. If a species is known to be large-bodied and it's being heavily killed by fisheries, even if we don't know the exact decline percentage yet, it is highly likely to be in trouble. It should be immediately flagged for a deeper assessment. This is a really low-cost, high-impact way to just flag the biggest potential risks early on.
Okay, that makes sense for a first pass. But relying on just one simple trait like size seems a bit risky long-term. How do assessment bodies integrate this biology with the quantitative decline numbers when they have them?
That brings us to the adjustment or modification approach. Bodies like COSEBIC, that's the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, they don't just follow the numbers blindly. They use expert opinion, informed by the kind of research in this paper, to adjust the quantitative assessments based on those key life history traits, like age at maturity and body size. It's kind of their sober second thought, ensuring that the strict quantitative criteria, like, say, an 80% decline threshold, are tempered by the species' underlying scientifically established biology. Does it recover slowly or quickly?
Right, adding biological context to the raw numbers. Okay, so now that we have a clearer picture of what makes marine fish vulnerable, what are the remaining unknowns? Where does the roadmap for marine fish conservation lead next, according to this work?
Well, the major limitation, and it's a big one, remains the true definition of global extinction risk, even for species that have been massively depleted. Take the spiny dogfish in the Northeast Atlantic. As mentioned, it declined by over 78%, which clearly qualified it as endangered under standard criteria. Yet even at that incredibly low point, the population may still have numbered in the tens of millions of adults.
That is a crucial distinction, isn't it? A severe, localized, or regional demographic collapse versus a true global disappearance of the entire species.
Exactly. And because of that, we urgently require a far better understanding of minimum viable population sizes MVP. We need to know, from both genetic diversity perspectives and demographic stability perspectives, what is the absolute minimum number of fish below which a population simply cannot recover, even if all fishing stopped tomorrow. Without knowing the MVP for different types of species, it's very hard to honestly predict their true strong risk of global extinction in the wild.
That seems like the biggest unsolved mystery we face right now in marine conservation. What else? What other areas should future researchers be focusing on, beyond just counting numbers and estimating MVPs?
We need to know much more about the links between behavior, ecology, and extinction risk. Marine fishes aren't just, swimming automatons reacting passively to fishing nets. Many have quite sophisticated mating systems, specific habitat requirements, complex movements. And critically, many species have this tendency to gather in massive, predictable, and very dense spawning aggregations.
Which, of course, means they make themselves an incredibly easy target for modern fishing fleets if those locations are known.
Precisely. We need to quantify that vulnerability much better. If an industrial fleet targets a known aggregation, maybe a single seamount or reef channel where the entire regional population comes to reproduce, they can potentially wipe out the reproductive capacity of that entire stock in a matter of days or weeks. That interaction between predictable fish behavior and hyper-efficient modern fishing technology needs to be better understood and definitely mitigated through management.
So, to sort of bring this all together, the work of Reynolds and his colleagues back in 2005 essentially confirmed what many terrestrial biologists perhaps already suspected or knew from their systems. Marine fishes are not fundamentally different. They're not magically resilient compared to other vertebrates in how they respond to severe threats when those threats interact with their own intrinsic biological traits.
That's the core message. This better biology first understanding, recognizing that size and maturity matter far, far more than just how many eggs you produce. That's what will ultimately enhance our ability to accurately assess threat status. And it helps us prioritize effective, targeted conservation action globally, focusing on the species most inherently at risk.
Okay. And as a final thought for you, our listener, to consider. Despite all the research and population census techniques available to us, the paper noted something quite sobering. Many local disappearances and even functional extinctions of marine fish populations went completely undetected until long after they had actually occurred. They just vanished quietly. So what implications does this knowledge gap, this silence surrounding the loss of local populations have for our understanding of global ecosystem stability, even if the species technically still exists somewhere else on the planet?
That's a profound challenge for all of us to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the biology of marine fish extinction risk.